The famous Roman poet and satirist Horace once said, "A picture is a poem without words." But have you ever wondered how poets achieve this? Making us see, not just hear, the worlds they create. One powerful tool of these poets is the epic simile, and in this presentation, we are going to look at one of these epic similes from Milton's epic Paradise Lost. Before embarking on this epic journey, let's delve into an overview of epic similes and how Milton utilizes them to highlight the thematic power of his epic Paradise Lost. Epic similes are intricate, extended comparisons that go beyond the mere comparison of using like or as. They create detailed and vivid imagery that infuse deeper layers of meaning, transforming the narrative into something grand and immersive. Epic similes were first perfected by Homer in his The Iliad and the Odyssey, and later adopted Virgil's magnum opus Aeneid, carrying forward the tradition of using them to evoke emotion, establish grandeur, and anchor key moments in the narrative. Milton, who is writing centuries later, in a completely different religious and philosophical climate, doesn't just use the epic simile, he transforms it in Paradise Lost. His similes are not only longer and more elaborate than Homer's, but they also serve as a tool for judgment and philosophical reflection. Using what scholars term ab extra, Milton integrates images from outside the classical epic tradition. This allows him to bring in fresh perspectives that magnify the moral, theological, and philosophical dimensions of his narrative. As we will see in the simile I am exploring today, what starts as an image of strength and order may gradually turn into fragility and illusion, and this is entirely by design. So, now that we have gotten a brief idea about the epic similes, now we can shift our focus to unpacking the Miltonic Simile. I would, for the sake of simplification, divide the simile into three parts. First, the bee imagery, then the swarming, and lastly, the fairy elves. So, let's begin with the first part with the bee imagery.
As bees in springtime, when the sun with Taurus rides, pour forth their populous youth about the hive in clusters. They among fresh dews and flowers fly to and fro, or on the smooth plank, the suburb of the straw-built citadel, new rubbed with balm, expatiate and confer their state affairs.
Now, what image does it raise into the mind? If you came to explore it in a vacuum, you may consider it to be some sort of romantic poetry, with its focus on close nature activity and seasonal references. The scene is calm and it mentions Taurus, a zodiac sign associated with months of April and May, months associated with nature's renewal and activity. The imagery of activity continues in the lines as the bees described as populous youth pour forth in clusters, moving among the fresh dews and flowers. Their movements is described to being to and fro, creating a rhythmic effect. There is a feeling of gracefulness and freedom in the lines. The imagery we get for the hive is a tiny civilization. The hive is a straw-built citadel, which makes it sound like a fortified city, not just a nest. The bees land on the shrub of this citadel, using what normally meant for outer edges of human city. They expirate and confer their state affairs. This makes them sound like citizens of a country. They aren't just moving around randomly, they are engaging in political or social discussion, It's fascinating to see bees getting described in such a manner, but this calm doesn't last for long as the scenes take a shift in tone, as the simile moves from harmony to tension.
So thick, the airy crowd swarmed and was straightened till the signal given.
This line paints an ominous image as the simile now marks a change from graceful movements to feeling of congestion, from a feeling of freedom to restriction. These lines create a build-up for something big to happen. The lines end with till the signal given, creating an almost military readiness, a coordinated response waiting to be triggered.
Behold a wonder! They but now who seemed in bigness to surpass earth's giant suns, now less than smallest dwarfs. In narrow room throng numberless, like that pygmalion race beyond the Indian mound of fairy elves, whose midnight revels by a forest side or fountain some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees, while overhead the moon sits arbitress, and nearer to the earth wheels her pale course. They on their mirth and dance intent, with jocund music charm his ear, at once with joy and fear his heart rebound.
This scene may seem strange at first, as all the tension that had built up in the previous lines is not resolved, but the simile moves into a different direction. The tone shifts once again into a mythical and dreamlike sequence. The crowd, described as huge and powerful like the mythological Titan race, suddenly becomes smaller than dwarfs, comparing them to the pygmy race, a mythical race consisting of tiny peoples and fairy elves. Milton putting emphasis on the other race of smaller creatures. This sense of illusion seeps into the line, some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees. This in turn also adds a layer of uncertainty for the reader. One may ask, what is the purpose of this? Milton wants us to engage and question what we trust. It becomes part of Milton's tool of judgment, his way of showing that perception can be deceiving, especially when it comes to pride, rebellion, or false glory. But to completely understand its significance, we need to look at the simile as a whole. The fairy elves dancing at midnight is not just a beautiful scene, it's a reflection of the nature of evil that are the fallen angels. Before Milton, Lucifer and evil in general was portrayed as heinous and despicable. But Milton's treatment of evil highlights how temptation often works, not as something repellent, but as something seductively alluring. One needs to also take note of the various levels of observation established by Milton. We as the readers observe the fallen angels, who are compared to elves, who in turn being watched by a peasant, who is under the grace of the moon as arbitress. This creates multiple levels of observation, just like how the universe has different levels of authority. God at the top, angels beneath him, humans below angels, and fallen angels at the bottom. Milton uses these layers of observations to showcase the downfall of the rebel angels, becoming a subject of observation rather than honor. Now that we have unpacked the full scope of the simile, from the bees to the military force to the dreamlike fairy scene, it's time to ask, what does all of this mean? What larger truth is Milton trying to suggest through these layers of imagery? Let's explore 3 possible interpretations.
The very first interpretation which we can have is Milton's idea of rebellion as a spectacle. We see in the beginning of the simile the fallen angels presented as a political force, like an organized political entity. In his comparison to bees, he calls them to be pouring out of their straw-built citadel and expatiating and conferring their state affairs, making them seem like a state-like collective, not random chaos, but structured political behavior. As the simile progresses, we see the once so important political actors are compared with the dwarfs, then to fairy elves, then to the Pygmalion race, and the political image which Milton had developed up to this point begins to get crushed. It's Milton's way of saying that while rebellion may initially appear rational and noble, it inevitably collapses into absurdity. Their midnight revels become a dream or hallucination seen by a wandering peasant. This move is deeply ironic. What once appeared like a potent new political order is now reduced to a something a simple man might imagine in the woods under moonlight. It highlights Milton's critique of revolution. Like the fairies' dance is a mirage, visually pleasing, even hauntingly beautiful, but ultimately empty. Another aspect in which we can interpret this is in terms of its aesthetic beauty. Milton doesn't make us recoil from evil, he makes us admire it. The titans, like fallen angels, when they shrink, Milton doesn't try to portray them as anything despicable, instead comparing them to dwarfs and fairy elves. Creatures we are not terrified of, instead they are enchanting to us. To a wandering peasant, the midnight revels of the fairy elves accompanied by jovial music is both beautiful and unsettling. That is, evil doesn't always come dressed in horror. Most of the time, it's in mirth and beauty, things that captivate us. When the fallen angels shrink, it's also a way of showing the diminishing grandeur of what remains of these rebels. Milton shows us that rebellion, especially satanic rebellion, doesn't lose its danger because it's small. In turn, it becomes more dangerous because it's beautiful. Another aspect through which we can interpret this is by looking at the power changes in according with the perspective to who is watching. In the beginning, when the rebel angels are described like a grand political force pouring out of their citadel, being busy with state affairs, they seem powerful, united, and important. But as the simile goes on, that image starts to shift. Milton compares them to dwarfs, then fairy elves, and finally something so tiny and strange that a wandering peasant might imagine seeing them in the woods, not even sure if it was real. To quote from the poem, "Whose midnight revels by a forest side, or found in some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees." What this shows is that power isn't just about size or strength, it's about perspective. From close, the rebellion might seem heroic and dangerous, but when one takes a step back, one could see the complete picture, which may turn the thing we were in awe of to look foolish, small, or even imaginary. Milton could be suggesting that the rebel angels, which we were in awe of during the beginning of the simile, were never truly powerful. They only seemed that way for a moment. Their grandeur fades once we see them through a different lens, making us question how we view power.
As we have seen, Milton's use of epic simile is not simply decorative. It's a deliberate philosophical instrument. By stretching a single image from the political order of bees to the illusionary beauty of fairy elves, he takes us on a journey from structure to a spectacle, from reality to dream, from pride to delusion. What begins as a scene of harmony and power transforms into a vision of fragility and illusion. This layered meaning and imagery makes Milton so special. Milton's simile reminds one that evil is not always grotesque. It is often elegant, alluring, and deceiving. But illusion, no matter how captivating, cannot stand in the light of truth. As we close, it would be fitting to return to Milton's own words, words that remind us how what we choose to see, and what lies hidden behind the things that dazzle us are all the matter of how we choose to see and interpret things. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven.